Hello, welcome to Slow Night Ancient Tales, here to help you find peaceful rest at the end of a busy day. Tonight, we will journey into the magnificent history of Goguryeo, a people who built a massive empire with the proud belief that they were the descendants of Dangun. A grand epic unfolds before us. It is the era of the great Prime Minister Eulji Mundeok and King Yeongyang, who never yielded even in the face of the massive threat from the unified Sui Empire. Woven into this is the heartbreaking destiny of Princess Gukhyang of the Jin dynasty, who left her ruined homeland and embarked on a perilous path of exile. Lay down all your complicated thoughts, lean on my calming voice, and let us travel through time together across the vast plains of the 700-year Goguryeo Empire. Find your most comfortable position and gently close your eyes. A growing 700 years. 1,000 and several hundred years after the holy founder Dangun Yeongyang settled at the foot of Mount Taebaek, bringing all the people of the east under his domain and establishing a nation, it was during the time of Dangun Himosu that his son, Goguryeo, founded the nation of Goguryeo in the land of northern Buyeo. In the nation of Goguryeo that he established, Goguryeo led his capable and swift people, conquering the east, west, south, and north, and expanding the territory. Thus, the original branch of Dangun's people started in northern Buyeo, and their territory stretched out in all directions. Later historians called this tribe the Buyeo people. However, at that time in this human world, there was a race called the Han people who stood in opposition to the Buyeo people. They were a tribe that proudly called themselves the descendants of Yao and Shun, and fortunately for them, a few great scholars emerged, leading them to revere what was called learning and to look up to their nation's king as the Son of Heaven. As some time passed, that nation came to be known in the human world as the Central Plain, and the world looked up to it as the nation of the Son of Heaven. As a result, the people of that nation naturally developed a sense of pride that they were different from others, considering themselves the shining Zhonghua, and viewing other nations as barbaric savages. In the eyes of these Zhonghua people, Goguryeo was nothing more than one of the eastern barbarians. However, Goguryeo did not care about such things. With a firm belief that they were the descendants of the holy Dangun, they took pride in the fact that if the Zhonghua people were the descendants of Yao and Shun, the people of Goguryeo were the descendants of the holy Dangun, and they never yielded. This was quite offensive in the eyes of China. They wanted to break Goguryeo's pride at least once. Unfortunately, China lacked the power to conquer an outside nation. Because the people of China all lived with a sense of self-importance, everyone was making a fuss trying to become the Son of Heaven, so no single nation or royal family ever lasted long. A new Son of Heaven would emerge for 10 or 20 years, only to be broken after another 10, 20, or 30 years. And if a Son of Heaven appeared in the east, another would appear in the west. Because these useless states constantly repeated this game of playing the Son of Heaven, the nation could never unite into one solid entity. Popping up here, popping up there, repeating such chaotic times, they didn't even have the time to lay a hand on Goguryeo, which was like a thorn in their side. Meanwhile, since Goguryeo founded the nation, the eastern land of Goguryeo grew larger and stronger day by day as a single, united people, so the current China could not even dare to look down on it. Only plotting an expedition against Goguryeo on the outside while focusing on internal unification, the Chinese race finally unified their country during the reign of Emperor Ling of later Han, and immediately set out on an expedition to Goguryeo. Having planned it for so long, they dispatched their army as soon as the country was unified. In the 4th year of King Sinde of Goguryeo, which was the 1st year of Jiaping under Emperor Ling of later Han, the Han people brought a massive army to strike Goguryeo, the thorn in their side since the founding of their nation. However, Goguryeo did not fight head-on against the invasion of this massive Han army. With a vast territory that rivaled the Han dynasty, Goguryeo strictly controlled the soldiers at the borders, allowing the enemy to march deep into their country, and avoided a massive, full-scale war, only releasing guerrilla forces to harass the enemy. No matter how far the Han army chased, no one fought them head-on, and as they marched deep into Goguryeo, transporting food became difficult, and the weather turned a bitter winter, forcing them to turn their army back. Defeated in the battle of food and transportation rather than armed combat, the Han army fled as if being chased, and at that moment, Goguryeo unleashed all the military forces they had kept deeply hidden and fiercely struck them. History recorded this battle, stating that the Han army was greatly defeated, and not even a single horse returned alive. In other words, they came to unfold the ambition they had harbored since their nation's founding, only to suffer a horrifying and crushing defeat where not a single person returned. Over 10 years later, during the time of King Goguryeo of Goguryeo, Emperor Xian of Han, trying somehow to destroy this mortal enemy Goguryeo, ordered Gongsun, the governor of Liaodong, to attempt another expedition against Goguryeo. The severed heads piled up like mountains. This, too, was a bitter and crushing defeat for the Han army. 5 years later, after weighing the strength of the Han dynasty, Gongsun of Liaodong threw off the yoke of Han and declared independence himself. This might have been one of the reasons, but the Han people, who originally enjoyed the nation-playing game of becoming the son of heaven, rose up like a swarm of bees from all directions trying to become the son of heaven as soon as 150 years had passed since the later Han was established. From the late years of King Goguryeo to the early years of King Sansang of Goguryeo, tens of thousands of Han people fled the chaotic land of China and sought refuge in Goguryeo, a land of paradise. Indeed, the Han dynasty was destroyed by Cao Cao, giving rise to Cao's Wei dynasty, while in Shu, Liu Bei rose up and established Shu Han, and in the south of the river, Sun Quan rose up and founded the Wu dynasty. So 3 sons of heaven emerged in a world where there should be only one. Here, the competition for the son of heaven began. The Wei dynasty claimed to be the legitimate son of heaven, as they inherited the lineage of the Han imperial family. The Wu dynasty, which occupied the south of the river where all the goods of the world gathered, insisted that they were the true son of heaven of China. The Shu dynasty raised its voice, saying that since the Han imperial family belonged to the Liu clan, Liu Bei of Shu was the legitimate owner and the true master of the Central Plain. At this point, the value of the eastern nation, Goguryeo, gradually rose. They once looked down on and despised Goguryeo as eastern barbarians, but now, with 3 sons of heaven standing like the legs of a tripod cauldron, a battle of wits and operations began to draw Goguryeo, a nation of courtesy and law rather than savagery, to their side. In the 4th year of King Dongchon, during the reign of Emperor Ming of Wei, a goodwill envoy from Wei visited Goguryeo bringing many gifts. Thus, the strong eastern nation of Goguryeo and the newly rising western nation of Wei established friendly relations. Then the following year, an envoy from the Wu dynasty also visited Goguryeo. However, for Goguryeo, which had already made a pact with the Wei dynasty, joining hands with the Wu dynasty again would be a betrayal of Goguryeo's trust. So, they cut off the heads of the envoys from the Wu dynasty and sent them to Wei. The Wei dynasty did establish friendly relations with Goguryeo. However, because the borderlines of Wei and Goguryeo met, small conflicts constantly arose. Since Goguryeo expanded its territory every year, friction with neighboring countries near the border was natural. There could not be an absence of border disputes between Goguryeo, which was relentlessly advancing into the land of Liaodong, and the Wei dynasty, which claimed suzerainty over it. Then, the nation-playing game broke out again in the land of China. It had been 70 or 80 years since the 3 kingdoms of Wei, Shu, and Wu were established, so it was about time it started again. As the Jie in dynasty newly rose, it destroyed Wei and Shu, and over 10 years later it even collapsed Wu, unifying the Chinese continent once again. That unification lasted for about 40 years, and this time northern nomadic tribes rose up and established nations, driving the Jin dynasty south and opening the so-called era of the 16 kingdoms of the 5 barbarians. 5 foreign tribes from the north and west, the Xiongnu, Xianbei, Jie, Di, rose up in the northern parts of China, acting as independent nations for as long as 30 or 40 years, or as short as 5 or 6 years. The total number of nations established by these 5 foreign tribes, one after another, was 13. At the same time, the Han Chinese Jin dynasty, chased out by the foreign tribes, fled south and established the Eastern Jin, and the nations founded by the Han people were also split into three. While the numerous powers of the Chinese continent were deeply immersed in this game of playing son of heaven and building nations, Goguryeo remained truly peaceful and unharmed. They incited Northern Wei to destroy the Yan state, which had been a thorn in their side, hindering their expansion into the Liaodong region, and seamlessly expanded their territory to the east and south. During the roughly 100 years of the reigns of two outstanding monarchs, King Gwanggaeto and King Jiangsu, Goguryeo leapt forward to become a great Eastern empire that no one dared to touch. Around the time the Western nations were still repeating the process of rising and falling, Southern Qi, which had just established itself after destroying the Song dynasty, sent a high-ranking official title of General of Agile Cavalry, along with many gifts to King Jiangsu of Goguryeo in its very first year. King Jiangsu, who received the title from the Son of Heaven of Southern Qi, sent an envoy to express his gratitude. However, unfortunately, that Goguryeo delegation was captured by Northern Wei soldiers on their way to Southern Qi. This was because, no matter where one went on the Chinese continent from Goguryeo, they had to pass through Northern Wei. The Emperor of Northern Wei, who had been confident that he held the strongest friendly relations with Goguryeo, was greatly enraged by this incident. Blinded by jealousy, an envoy rushed to Goguryeo, asking why they were playing both sides with Southern Qi, but King Jiangsu of Goguryeo simply laughed it off lightly. Just let them be. It is merely a competition among themselves. Now Northern Wei, not wanting to fall behind Southern Qi, will send me an even higher title. Indeed, as soon as King Jiangsu passed away, Northern Wei scrambled to compete in sending titles with all sorts of long and splendid designations attached. They also hurried to offer a title to the new king, King Munja, who succeeded him. In the third year of King Munja's reign, an incredibly solemn and majestic title, spanning a whopping 21 characters, arrived from Southern Qi. Following this, in the 17th year of his reign, a title of equal standing arrived from the Liang dynasty. Now, a blatant competition of offering titles began among the nations of the Chinese continent. In the second year of King Yeongyang of Goguryeo, the Liang dynasty sent a very long and high title to King Yeongyang. Unfortunately, however, that envoy was captured by Northern Wei soldiers halfway along the road. Northern Wei was greatly panicked. Thinking they had been preempted by the Liang dynasty, they hurriedly created a long and splendid title that would not fall behind Liang's and offered it to King Yeongyang. Not only the already established nations, but the countless new nations springing up like bamboo shoots across the Chinese continent offered high titles to the king of Goguryeo as soon as they founded their countries, or rather as one of the very operations to establish their nations. This was their most urgent and crucial matter of state. So to speak, it was a declaration of national founding, or to speak more clearly, an application for national recognition. The numerous small nations of the Chinese land, popping up here and fading away there like bamboo shoots after the rain, often perished in 40 or 50 years at the longest, or 2 or 3 years at the shortest. Even as they founded nations and called themselves emperors, they were always anxious and insecure, lacking confidence in whether this was truly a proper nation or if they possessed the qualifications of a son of heaven. Until others recognized them as a true nation, they were weak entities that were hard to believe in, even for themselves. Even if they somehow gathered a few hundred or a few thousand subordinates and proclaimed themselves emperor, it was useless if their surroundings didn't acknowledge it. And getting recognition from mediocre neighboring countries brought no authority whatsoever. Right here, receiving recognition from the great empire of Goguryeo carried an utterly immense weight. The status of Goguryeo, which had grown steadily and solidly as a single people under a single royal family for over 700 years since its founding, was truly like a single, noble crane standing alone among a flock of chickens. Amidst the numerous nations appearing and disappearing, shouting here and there that they were the true Son of Heaven, and that this was their land, Goguryeo, standing silently in the east, calmly looked down on all the commotion with nothing but the pride of being Dangun's descendants and Gojumong's nation. It was a dignified yet terrifying nation that possessed the power to sweep across the world if it just made up its mind and swung its sword once. Yet it never gave a single glance beyond the ancient territory of its ancestors. A nation recognized by this very Goguryeo could comfortably endure, acting as a true state in the world. Thus, after much thought, the method they came up with was the means of bestowing titles. Since titles like governor or feudal lord were bestowed by the Son of Heaven, if an ambitious man wishing to become the Son of Heaven granted the title of general or feudal lord to the king of Goguryeo, and if the king of Goguryeo did not refuse and quietly accepted it, it meant the king of Goguryeo had recognized him as the true Son of Heaven. Therefore, to ensure the king of Goguryeo would not refuse but gladly accept long and endless titles of kings and generals, offered by all sorts of emperor candidates in the world, poured into Goguryeo like a rain shower, along with truly coveted, massive gifts. Even after sending many gifts, the various monarchs of China were inwardly terrified. They fretted, wondering what to do if they were turned away, what to do if they were refused, or if their gifts would be sent back while another nations were accepted. However, the generous and open-hearted kings of Goguryeo simply accepted whatever was sent by anyone. It was partly because the process of refusing and returning each one was bothersome, and partly because there was no reason to do so. During these 700 years, Goguryeo became even more massive and prosperous. They commanded a vast number of people that could not be compared to those nations that boasted of their large populations, and compared to them, who were mere fragments of barbarians, Goguryeo was a nation where several strong tribes were united as one. As the nation's body grew larger, the culture filling it inside also blossomed brilliantly. In the north, a vigorous northern culture grew, set against the vast and majestic nature of Buyeo. In the south, based on the culture brought in by Chinese people who had fled the chaotic wars and nation-playing games to seek refuge in the paradise of Goguryeo, the beautiful Lelang culture and Goguryeo culture, crafted by the highly artistic indigenous people of Goguryeo, were shining dazzlingly. In the land of China, because they were constantly immersed in playing the Son of Heaven and building nations, no single culture could develop deeply, and they often withered away soon after blooming. With only the early forms of all kinds of cultures scattered in disorder, it was like a sample market of cultural origins. On the other hand, in Goguryeo, a brilliant culture crafted by the hands of a single people over the long period of 700 years was coloring the entire East into a magnificent garden of flowers. In short, the endless divisions and Son of Heaven games on the Chinese continent allowed Goguryeo to completely relax, without any major external worries, and focus solely on enriching their own nation. Small nations like Baekje and Silla, crouching to the east and south, occasionally scratched the borders and acted as a nuisance. But Goguryeo, with a generous and broad mind stemming from the same bloodline of Dangun, did not make a big issue out of it. They just casually accepted the titles offered competitively by the Chinese emperors in the West, and appropriately exchanged goodwill envoys, and that was enough. Because those over there were only anxious to look good to Goguryeo, like concubines fighting for favor, Goguryeo could rest its head high and sing songs of peace indefinitely, focusing only on tending to the nation. The ancient land of Liaodong had now been completely reclaimed and restored. From now on, they only needed to securely protect this vast and richly nourished fertile territory. There was nothing more to wish for, nothing more to covet. Right around that time, yet another new nation arose in the land of China. A new general named Yeongyang appeared and swept the world for a while, eventually overthrowing the Zhou dynasty and establishing the Sui dynasty. Another one has popped up. Goguryeo considered it no big deal, treating it as just another common occurrence. That was the 24th year of King Pyongwon of Goguryeo. The Zhou dynasty, which fell to the Sui dynasty, was a nation that had destroyed northern Qi only 3 years prior. That Zhou dynasty was once again swallowed by the Sui dynasty. Now only 2 nations, the Jin dynasty and the Sui dynasty, remained on the Chinese continent, so Goguryeo could not help but gradually cast a wary eye. While the Han people were divided countless times and too busy fighting bloody battles among themselves to look outside, Goguryeo had exerted a silent, heavy threat upon them for a long 600 to 700 years. The Han people had even thrown away their proud Zhonghua ego and spent their days bowing their heads to Goguryeo. Therefore, the feeling of inwardly grinding their teeth at Goguryeo was an ancient emotion flowing deep within their blood. Their arrogance, loudly claiming to be the center of the world, had been mercilessly trampled and crushed before the eastern nation of Goguryeo for a long time. It was manageable when the power of the Han people was scattered, but if the Han people of that vast land were to unite tightly as one, the first spearhead they would draw would undoubtedly be aimed at Goguryeo. A massive, final showdown with their destinies on the line. Whether the Han people would fall or the Buyeo people would fall, whether the descendants of Yao and Shun would perish or the descendants of Dangun would perish, would take place before long. It is said that the once shattered Chinese continent is now left with only two, the Jin dynasty and the Sui dynasty. It is possible that the two nations might join forces to avenge the humiliations of the past. If they do not join forces, in the near future, one nation will surely swallow the other, leaving only a single, massive, unified empire. Only then would a terrifying war of revenge begin to wash away the disgrace of having lived prostrating before the eastern nation they had called barbarians since the dawn of time. From the barren northern extremes, where one must wear thick clothes even in summer, to the warm southern extremes, where fresh fruits and green vegetables grow even in the dead of winter. It is a nation with infinite territory, so vast it is hard to even guess, and countless numbers of people. If that massive Han race focused and poured the power of their entire nation into one place, it would truly be a horrifyingly terrifying threat. At first, even upon hearing this news, they took it lightly, assuming another new group had appeared somewhere, just as it had always been. However, contrary to expectations, the movements of the new power were slow and cautious. Both the Jin and Sui dynasties, which currently divided the continent, did not move hastily, but rather kept their bodies fully crouched and focused only on building their strength internally. There was a clear sign of strictly refraining from the light, arrogant, and frivolous actions of the past. Amidst this suffocating stillness, Goguryeo could no longer just stand by and watch. The life-or-death fate of the great empire of Goguryeo depended on what kind of countermeasures were taken immediately. At that time, Eulji Mundeok, the prime minister of Goguryeo, sharply read the extraordinary nature of the approaching massive storm amidst this seemingly peaceful stillness. He also felt an urgent need to recover his health, which had weakened after decades of agonizing devotion to the affairs of the state. This was because a crucial battle upon which the survival of the nation and the pride of the people depended was approaching. If an urgent crisis arises in the nation and you send someone to summon me, I shall run to the palace without delay. After bowing deeply and offering his farewell greetings to King Pyongwon, Eulji Mundeok left the capital and retreated to a quiet mountain villa in Sorogol. Entrusting his body to that place, which boasted clear water, refreshing air, and outstanding scenery, the great Prime Minister Eulji Mundeok lived a life of leisure, slowly honing the energy of his body and mind. And finally, the fateful day arrived. An urgent report flew in stating that the Jin dynasty had been completely destroyed by the Sui dynasty. The Sui dynasty had finally become the sole master of the world. Sure enough, the Sui dynasty, intoxicated with victory, was already showing momentum to bare its fangs, finding suspicious faults with Goguryeo. An envoy, urgently summoned by the king, rushed to the mountain villa in Sorogol like an arrow, and as soon as he heard the messenger's words, Prime Minister Eulji dashed back to the capital and, breathing heavily, prostrated himself before the king. Before they can even grow their bulk, before they can fully build their strength, I will lead the way and smash them to pieces. I will grind the Chinese land not into 16 pieces, but into 16 million pieces. If they even harbor a foolish thought to touch our great Goguryeo, I will make sure not even their bones remain. If they have the pride of the Han people, we have the pride of the holy Dangun's people. Representing all the people of Goguryeo, he prostrated himself before the spiritual presence of the founding monarch, King Dongyongshong, and offered a passionate and firm oath. The people of Goguryeo, famous throughout the world for their swiftness and bravery, also became of one mind with their strong leader, offering a blood-boiling oath before the heavens and their ancestors to utterly crush those arrogant Sui dynasty bandits. Around the time the hot heat of summer faded and the autumn colors gradually deepened, Prime Minister Eulji returned to the capital, Jangansong, having completely recovered his formerly boiling vitality, thanks to a period of sweet rest for his exhausted body in Sorogol, where the mountains are beautiful and the waters are clear. The international situation he faced upon his return was entangled in a truly precarious and subtle manner. The Chinese continent, where people scrambled to rise up just by sea, eming slightly stronger than others, saying, "Does the Son of Heaven have a special seed? I will try being an emperor too." Since the Han dynasty was established, countless sons of heaven had been crowned and overthrown repeatedly, so their history was rather better described as a bloody play staged by numerous ambitious men dreaming of becoming emperor. Dragging along such a history of chaos, it was finally during the reign of Emperor Wen of Sui that they swept away all the bandits and ambitious men trying to seize the world, finally succeeding in unifying the vast Chinese realm into one. For Goguryeo, they could not just stand by with their arms crossed and watch this massive event as if watching a fire across a river. The Chinese people's hatred and vigilance toward Goguryeo, seeing them as a thorn in their side, was like an instinct deeply carved into their bones since the very distant ancient times. However, the actual weight of power between Goguryeo, which had early on tightly united as a single people under the rule of outstanding monarchs, growing solidly while purely building its own physical strength, and the Chinese nation, which was shattered into pieces as everyone fought to become emperor, was so different that it dared not even be compared. Furthermore, the sons of heaven, who occasionally appeared in the land of China claiming to have established new nations, could not dare to ignore or treat Goguryeo carelessly, because they could only be treated as true states by their surroundings after receiving the stamp of approval from the large and strong established great power, Goguryeo. So while they had no choice but to outwardly bow their heads and lay flat before Goguryeo, the profound grudge and desire for revenge toward Goguryeo were growing vigorously like poisonous mushrooms deep within their hearts, as much as the lofty pride of the Zhonghua nation, the center of the world, had been mercilessly trampled and ignored by the eastern Goguryeo. Even in the distant past, the moment the Chinese land was briefly unified under a single Son of Heaven, whether it was former Han or later Han, the first place they raised an army and reached out to was the expedition against Goguryeo. Therefore, since Emperor Wen of Sui had now completely unified the world, it was an obvious fact that as soon as he caught his breath, solidified the nation's foundation, and stabilized the unification project, he would immediately stretch his demonic claws toward Goguryeo's neck. Eulji Mundeok, who had been quietly tending his body in Sorogol, rushed to the capital out of breath at the urgent news that the Sui dynasty had unified the continent. Because the external threats from China had been quiet for a while, it was true that there was a slight gap in national defense, as they poured their efforts solely into internal politics to take care of the inside of the country. However, because Goguryeo was inherently a swift and brave warrior race to the bone, and the pride and self-esteem of being Dangun's descendants were breathing vibrantly, they were able to reforge the invincible, strong Great Goguryeo army without expending too much effort. If the Sui enemies invade in the future, covering the sea and land, what will you do? We will strip them of all their armor and weapons and chase them away naked. Oh, the magnificently burning red soul of Goguryeo. Since the founding monarch, King Dongyongsheng, laid the foundation on this land, those who would defend this holy land to the end, a land that had never once been trampled by the filthy military boots of foreign enemies for over 1,000 years, were none other than these young men raising their voices right before his eyes. The Prime Minister gave a calm yet reassuring smile and nodded at the young soldiers shouting at the top of their lungs. Around that time, the king, King Pyongwon, was noticeably weakened in body and lying in a sickbed. A long period of 32 years of reign, 32 years had passed since he began enjoying the throne of the dazzling Great Goguryeo Empire, receiving excellent assistance from the famous Prime Minister Eulji Mundeok, while piling up the splendid titles of Great General and King, flatteringly offered by the countless nations that appeared and vanished like dew in the vast Chinese land. Just as a massive wave of war clouds was about to hit Goguryeo, which had been truly peaceful and unharmed, a deep shadow of illness coincidentally fell upon the king's body. It seems I will have to bid farewell to the ties of this world with this. A royal bedchamber where the cool evening sunlight of autumn spilled over the paper windows, dyeing the room yellow. The king, who had been lying with his eyes quietly closed while receiving the utmost care from Prime Minister Eulji, opened his dry lips and spoke in a low voice. Your Majesty, His Highness the Crown Prince has already grown up to be majestic and wise, so the future of the nation is more solid than ever. Please rest your mind at ease. That is right. The Crown Prince has grown up wonderfully, and experienced ministers, including the Prime Minister, are standing firm like pillars, steadfastly protecting the nation, so I do not worry about what comes after in the slightest. However, I wanted to watch the fierce turn of events in the world with these two eyes a little longer, so it is truly regrettable beyond words. The king slowly lifted his heavy eyelids. Though sick and old, with the elasticity gone from his skin, and even the light in his eyes slightly dimmed, the regal spirit and flashing brilliance coiled deep inside were still fierce enough to suffocatingly suppress the young people around him. The relentless, formidable fighting spirit and mettle that had flowed proudly in the blood of this holy royal family since the time of the founding monarch, King Dongyong. Ironically, King Pyongwon, who was born with an unusually large amount of it, had a lingering regret that pierced his heart. He had let the very long period of his 32-year reign pass by far too peacefully, without a single war. Peaceful days when not even a small spark of conflict arose. As the numerous empires and monarchs of the Chinese land were busy flattering and paying tribute just to get into Goguryeu's good graces. It was a blessing for the people, but considering his fiery and enterprising warrior nature, it was also a very bland, boring, and highly unsatisfactory time. After spending his entire life so comfortably and quietly, only now, when the shadow of death that would take his breath away was right before his nose, did a massive continental conflict that would make his blood boil approach right before his eyes. In the face of this cruel and absurd trick of fate, a lonely and quiet smile spread around the king's wrinkled eyes. Why does the heavens so heartlessly turn a blind eye to my boiling heart? Your Majesty is truly too greedy. You have commanded the distinguished emperors and monarchs of the whole world beneath your feet, living a radiant life, and you still have unfulfilled desires? The king and his minister looked at each other in the quiet room, sharing a faint, soundless smile. That letter from the impudent Sui Emperor Yeongyang a few days ago. Prime Minister, read that letter aloud once more. Prime Minister Eulji carefully opened the cabinet at the head of the king's bed and took out an arrogant and insolent state letter sent by the Sui Emperor a short time ago. And at the king's request, he slowly read down the text in a mocking tone. Although you call yourself a vassal state of the Sui dynasty on the outside, on the inside, you do not fulfill the sincerity and the etiquette of a subject toward the emperor. If I do not forgive your past faults and immediately dispatch a single general to trample you, why would I wait for a great effort? This was the content of that famous, arrogant state letter sent by Emperor Wen of Sui, Yeongyang, in the 10th year of the Kaiwang era. In short, since Emperor Wen of Sui had pacified the world and achieved a unified empire, for the sake of the dignified face of unifying a great nation, it was only right for all the nations of the world to eagerly send tributary envoys to congratulate the emperor on his accession, and it would be normal for the picture to show the Sui emperor benevolently accepting it. However, the massive eastern empire of Goguryeo alone did not even snort, remaining silent and not budging an inch. From Goguryeu's perspective, following the precedent of the past 700 years, if a new son of heaven ascended the throne in the land of China, the proper order was for them to first send an envoy to the king of Goguryeo, offering utmost gifts and the highest titles while paying their respects. They believed that even if they didn't engage in an unsightly flattery competition like the divided times since Sui unified the vast continent, it was natural reason for them to first bow their heads and offer polite greetings. On the other hand, from the Sui dynasty's perspective, they had the face of a unified great empire that had just unified the world. He was the emperor in name and reality who had the world at his fingertips, and he had become the master of the world, so it was only fitting for the monarchs of all nations in the world to crawl on their own feet, kneel, and bow their heads. If there was a group that stiffly held their heads high and refused to bow, even to save the trampled face of the great nation, the emperor himself would have to lead a fearsome army, force them to their knees, and punish them. However, the Sui emperor, the master of the world, was not receiving a bow from the eastern Goguryeo alone, so the prestige and face of the empire were being terribly crushed both internally and externally. If Goguryeo stubbornly persisted to the end and did not bow on its own, it would be right to immediately drive hundreds of thousands of troops to punish them and teach them a lesson. However, the internal situation of the Sui dynasty was different from how it looked on the outside. The Sui dynasty, which had barely unified the Chinese continent by settling a long civil war and chaos and squeezing out all its bone-grinding strength, currently had neither the reserve power nor the luxury to attack the military powerhouse Goguryeo, which was crouching across the sea. If they recklessly touched the beast-like Goguryeo, relying only on the face of a great nation, there was a high and terrible risk that their own nation, which had just achieved unification and whose foundations were not yet solidly laid, would instead be smashed and broken. For the sake of the great nation's face, they unconditionally had to strike, yet the military power and national strength required to strike right away were scraping the bottom. Caught in this difficult swamp of a dilemma, the Sui emperor gathered all the intelligent and wise people in the country and made them groan and study for days and nights. And the clever scheme they came up with after that agonizing thought was to send a single state letter floating to Goguryeo. It was a letter that had to perform a truly delicate and difficult tightrope walk. It had to ensure the lofty face of the Sui dynasty, the master of the world, was not diminished in the slightest, while at the same time not provoking the fiery wrath and temper of Goguryeo. It was a text cunningly crafted by carefully polishing and discussing each and every character. Your arrogant and insolent attitude, Goguryeo, is something that rightfully deserves punishment by driving an army to destroy you. And if I, the emperor, simply make up my mind, stepping on you is an easy task that requires no great effort. But if you repent your past stiff wrongs and fix them by lying flat, you too will be my loyal subject. T.S. So why would I, the emperor, unnecessarily show no mercy and seek blood to punish you? So please, from now on, change your mind and carefully follow and keep the laws of the great Sui Empire. If you look only at the sentences revealed on the surface of the text, it is close to a fierce scolding and shouting, but the real underlying meaning hidden between the lines was a desperate plea to the point of being subservient. We have neither the power nor the will to touch you, Goguryeo, right now. So please, just stay quietly and peacefully at the borders. Since we have the face of an emperor of a unified empire in name, please, in front of other nations, just pretend that you, Goguryeo, are a loyal vassal state to the Sui dynasty. After quietly listening to the shallow state letter of the Sui emperor, read by Prime Minister Eulji with a smirk, the king chuckled and turned his gaze to the Prime Minister. Will you write a reply to that letter pretending to be arrogant? It is obvious bluffing right from the start, so why would we waste our precious ink and brush by writing a reply? Those cowards, too, are not expecting a submissive reply from us in the slightest. Then, is the Sui envoy who brought that insolent state letter still staying at our guest house without having returned? That is what I understand. The emperor's command was so strict that out of fear, he doesn't even dare to return before receiving a reply and is trembling in fear. Good. Then summon him to the palace, show him the bitter taste of our Goguryeo, mock him to our heart's content, and chase him away. As your majesty wishes, I will handle it thoroughly and satisfyingly. What exactly the king's deep illness was, or what cause it stemmed from, not even the most renowned doctors in the country could pinpoint. It was not a broken bone, nor was it a common symptom of illness, like the organs inside the body aching specifically, or hurting as if tearing apart. His vitality was simply weakening, as if water was draining from his body. For an ordinary person, after soothing a day's hard fatigue with a deep night's sleep, their eyes would snap open the next morning and new energy would spring up again. But the king was not like that at all. Even when he opened his eyes in the morning, even as the evening deepened, not a single hair of vitality sprang up. Even bending and straightening a single finger was bothersome and exhausting, and in his mind he was always suffering, crushed by an unknown heavy compulsion and melancholy. The king calmly accepted this unexplained decline in vitality as a sign that he would surely leave this world before long. The great task of building a rich nation and strong army, which he had to achieve as a monarch in this world, had already been completely finished without exception, and even the crown prince who would succeed him had grown up wise and majestic, completely erasing any remaining worries about the nation's future. Thus, he firmly believed that heaven was now calling him to come up, because there was no longer any reason to live on with lingering attachments in this world. The king of Goguryeo, who was ruled by the steadfast belief in fate that flows in the blood of this nation's people, organized his mind on his own, thinking he would never be able to rise again from the sickbed he had fallen into this time. And since it was heaven setting the time and calling him, it was a providence of nature that required no resenting of anyone, nor any desperate fretting to beg for his life. If there was only one complaint lingering in his heart at the final moments of his life, it was merely the regret that, having been born with the instinct of a blood-boiling warrior, he had never properly drawn his sword in his entire life and had grown old living a life too smooth and peaceful. The rest of his life was perfect. While he sat on the throne and ruled, he leisurely enjoyed the rare gifts and splendour. Titles competitively offered by the numerous sons of heaven who faded in and out of the Chinese continent to cater to Goguryeo's taste and win their favor, and he reigned as the glorious #1 figure of the peaceful and prosperous great nation of Goguryeo, without receiving any military threat from the outside. He had a good prime minister by his side who was capable of holding the world, and he had raised an excellent and brilliant crown prince. So truly, even among the countless monarchs who left their names in history, it would be rare to find one who enjoyed such an uncommonly smooth and successful life. If only he had personally experienced the whirlpool of a great war that would shake the continent while alive, swinging a sword on horseback. If it is said that this was the king of Goguryeo's sole regret and complaint in his lifetime, one could surely guess more than enough just how overwhelmingly powerful and prestigious Goguryeo was in that era. The 1,000-year-old rare wild ginseng, which Yeonpade, an herb gatherer deep in the mountains, had procured for Prime Minister Eulji by climbing a sheer cliff in the past, was fully brewed and offered to the king's sickbed. Even while drinking the boiled water of that impossibly precious wild ginseng served in a jade bowl, the king showed a hollow, bitter smile. Heaven is already calling me holding a predetermined ledger of life, so what use is this mere grass root? Because it was offered with such utmost devotion by the prime minister guarding his side, he could not bring himself to turn it away and accepted the medicine bowl to drink. But from the start, he didn't expect the slightest medicinal effect to cure his illness. The upright Prime Minister Eulji, who did not know how to give lip service consolation or vain flattery and wholly possessed the natural warrior disposition of Goguryeo, also smiled bitterly at the king's words. Your Majesty still, because it was something a rustic villager from a mountain village, gathered at the risk of his life, with the utmost devotion thinking of the king, I too could not bring myself to turn away that loyalty and gratefully accepted it to offer to your Majesty. If you had sent it to that foolish Qin Shi Huang who searched the world for vain medicine dreaming of eternal life, he would have jumped up and down with joy. As for me, I am already someone heaven has destined and called for, so truly a precious and rare elixir is just being wasted in vain. Indeed, just as the king who foresaw his death had premonitions, on a day in October of that year when the autumn leaves were falling, King Pyongwon quietly breathed his last. As a brilliant and great king who unwaveringly led a prosperous and peaceful nation during his 32-year reign, he embarked on a long journey to the side of his ancestors, burying only the single regret of his life in his heart, that he could not refreshingly break the nose of that insolent and arrogant Sui emperor. The people called him King Pyongwon. The great Prime Minister Eulji Mundeok, who had served this excellent king like a shadow for a long period of over 20 years and contributed more than anyone to the nation's prosperity and peace, sent off King Pyongwon in tears and came to serve his eldest son, the new king, as his lord. The new king, King Yeongyang, who had guarded the crown prince seat for a whopping 25 years by the late king's side and learned the virtues of an emperor, was a perfect monarch with not an inch of shortcoming to inherit the proud shrine of great Goguryeo that looked down upon the world, whether judging by his age or the experience he had accumulated over that time. Furthermore, the famous Prime Minister Eulji Mundeok, possessing the wisdom to rule the world, came to assist the new king flawlessly from the left and right, following the earnest dying wish of the late king. And because the two had shared joys and sorrows since the early days of the crown prince and built deep trust and friendship, they were tightly bound by a very profound faith and affection that far surpassed a common ruler-subject relationship. I hope the majestic epic of Goguryeo told today has brought a little peace and strength to your heart. Bury the worries of your complicated reality gently into this magnificent ancient tale, and I hope you sleep more comfortably and deeply than anyone else tonight. Sweet dreams.